In this video, I'll be expanding my Homelab dial-up setup from one line to many. We'll dive into the world of Cisco voice interface cards, improve my physical phone line infrastructure setup, hear plenty of modems get online, and then we'll pressure test the whole system with one of the only pieces of equipment you'd want to dial up with in this day and age anyway, a Dreamcast. Let's get into it. I'd like to use a combination of the modules in these various Cisco units I own to both expand and improve my Homelab dial-up setup. In a previous video, I had set up a Cisco 2600 with a single port modem in the back of it. It's on top of the rack. I flip it on when I want to mess around with dial-up stuff. It's been working great. But in order for dial-up to work, I actually need a telephone network. That's being simulated by this Cisco phone adapter, or ATA, analog telephone adapter. The modem on the computer and the modem that you saw on the back of the 2600 need a real network that this thing simulates. The intended purpose of this thing is to let a telephone network travel over IP on a network. But I'm cheating a little bit. I've got it set up so that when someone dials this port, it immediately in turn rings this one. For example, what this setup means in practice is if I want to dial up with a second computer at the same time, I need another one of these, and I need to put another one of these cards in the back of the 2600. That's not too big of a deal, but I mean, at a certain point, this just clearly doesn't scale, and it's obviously not what like a small business or ISP was doing. Now, to talk about how some of this gear is going to help me improve that setup, let's start with this guy in the middle. This is a Cisco 2900 series router, a 2911 to be exact. It came out in 2009. This was very generously donated by a viewer named Steven, and it's got some pretty interesting cards on the back. These are VIX, or voice interface cards. You can see they've got the phone line RJ11 ports. Those are not Ethernet ports. And I believe either one or both of these can be used to replicate the behavior I'm accomplishing with this ATA. I'll probably graduate to more sophisticated setups, but what this means in practice is that this card can act as two of these. You call this phone line, it rings this one. You call this one, it rings that one. Hi, it's me, from the future. Over the next few minutes of this video, as I describe all this hardware and the modules in it, those of you that are familiar with analog telephone systems will see that I was making some pretty bad assumptions about what I could accomplish with these cards, particularly when it came to the FXO card. As you're exploring the analog telephone, VoIP, and voice hardware world, two terms are going to come up a lot. FXO and FXS. FXO stands for Foreign Exchange Office, and FXS stands for Foreign Exchange Subscriber, or sometimes Foreign Exchange Station. I have one card of each type. If you're anything like me, knowing which word each of those letters stands for doesn't really help a whole lot. FXS can be thought of as the telecom provider, the analog line coming into your house. Here's my FXS card. This thing can provide dial tone and line voltage to something like a phone or this modem. If you think about what the modem does when it starts up, it waits for a dial tone before dialing. These devices have FXO ports. They accept a dial tone from an FXS device. So at least in my case, this FXO port is not going to be particularly useful. We're going to focus on getting this FXS port working and providing dial tones to all my gear. So FXS provides dial tone, it's like the telecom provider, and FXO accepts it, it's like a telephone. If none of that made any sense, don't worry, I barely understand it myself. We'll figure it out together as we try to get some of the gear working for my use case. Worst case scenario, we'll just have to buy some more modules for this stuff on eBay. Unrelated to this video, it's got this 4G LTE card. I kind of want to pull that out actually. I have the antennas that go on this. So basically, this card lets this thing get on a cellular network. I guess as like a last resort backup network or something if your internet's down. Yeah, check that thing out. And I was thinking there, yeah, okay. There, that's where you'd put a SIM card to get online. Anyway, that's a little more modern than dial-up, to play with that someday. At this point, you might be wondering, okay, well, what's all that other gear on the table for? Throw your modems in here and be done with it. Well, this is too new to support the one-port modems I've got that I had put in the 2600. And then these cards, in turn, are too new to just go in the 2600. And I also don't want to run two machines at once. I want like a whole contained ISP unit. And more importantly, what prompted this whole upgrade is this, an NM8AM, an 8-port modem card. This was very generously donated by a viewer named David. David, thank you very much. And it's an incredible looking card. It's got these odd chips here. There's 4 more on the back, 1 for each port. 8 Zilog chips here, 1 for each port again. Flip it over for you. This section here is a daughter board to the whole thing. There's 4 more of those very interesting looking chips that were on the front. And then it clearly has some sort of daughter boarding capability itself for more expansion. Super interesting, not a very easy to come by card, and when you do find them, they're quite expensive. This thing is so awesome because it represents 8 of these that I'm currently using in the Cisco 2600. Here's the 2600 I'm currently using for dial-up, and I do believe this NM module fits here and will be compatible with this particular router. But again, I would then need 8 of these, at least in my current configuration. Which brings us to this beautiful thing. This is a Cisco 3745 from the 3700 series. I believe this came out in 2002, so it's a lot more era appropriate if we're talking about dial-up. I picked this one up on eBay, and what drew me to it was the ridiculous amount of modularity. So this is sort of the control board with 2 fast Ethernet ports, and it in turn has 3 WIC ports. Then we've got 4 expansion bays. This one happened to come with one that has 2 more fast Ethernet ports and another 2 WIC ports. These slide out, of course, as you might expect. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. The 8-port analog modem module is going to fit in there just fine, and this thing is compatible with it. Where my cunning plan falls apart is the voice interface cards that are going to serve as my telephone network from that other router I was just showing you. They don't work in here, so you can't just slap these in. Not compatible. It turns out in this 3700 series, you need to buy voice network module cards that slide in here and provide these ports that are compatible with these guys. Speaking of all these ports and modules and WICs, let's do a quick overview of what that's all about. These older Cisco units have WIC slots, or wide area network interface card slots. Obviously a modular form factor. This one's a modem, this one's a T1 line, this one's an ADSL line. Wide area network is, of course, the internet in most cases. Basically all the computers outside your local area network. It tends to travel over more exotic mediums. T1 in this card's case, for example. Most consumers or home users don't interact with wide area networks. If you're about my age and grew up in the United States, you might recognize this bad boy. This is an old broadband modem, and modems are still kind of the same today. So over coax you have WAN coming in, essentially, and then your local area network that you put your router and a switch and all your other computers on. But a service provider, of course, has use for wide area networks, and even a small or medium business might have wide area networks connecting their 2 offices. And that's why these WICs are modular. So we started with WICs. WICs were then upgraded to HWICs, or high-speed WICs. After HWIC came EHWIC, enhanced high-speed WIC. As you can imagine, the different routers, the different WIC styles, and the different versions of the operating system running on the router produces an incredibly complex matrix of compatibility. In fact, it's very useful to determine if you can use one of these things by searching its name, 8AM compatibility matrix on Google, and then plow through all the documentation to see if your particular config, iOS, and router version are going to work. But where I'd like to end up is this 3745 is doing all my ISP stuff. I can just flip it on and dial up and everything just works. But as I was saying before, I can't just throw these in here without another card. I have that on order, but who knows when that's going to show up or if it's even going to work. I'd like to learn how to use these voice interface cards in the meantime. So what is the solution? Well, it is, of course, to throw more routers at the problem. This is a Cisco 2821 from 2004, also generously donated by a viewer named Kevin. And I have studied the runes and the star charts, and I'm fairly confident at least one, probably both, of these voice interface cards are compatible with this thing. Now, unfortunately, we fall just short of the final goal. This 8AM is a little too old. I was looking up the documentation for this 2800 series and no compatibility. But that's okay. This is just going to be our learning unit here. We're going to figure out how to get these guys set up, and I'll also be able to throw 2 of these single port modems in the back. So by the end of the video, we should have a self-contained unit that lets us dial in with 2 computers. And I'll take that learning once the right parts come in, and we'll get everything working in this box with this glorious 8-port card. And in case none of that made any sense, this is the only router I have that theoretically is compatible with these voice cards and some modems I own. So that's why we'll learn, figure this thing out, and when more parts show up, we'll put everything in the other box. Let's get the physical configuration on this 2811 dialed in. I can't remember if this blanking plate here for the larger module came from this or I stole it from someone else, but let's go ahead and get it in because it's just been floating around on a shelf. I love the modularity of all these Cisco systems, but it does get confusing. All these different physical form factors and, you know, half height, full width, dual width and stuff have different names that are hard to keep track of. Let's see, we got to pull out this T1 card. I've got just a ton of these. Should probably do like a T1 trunking video or something where you use multiple lines. I guess we'll put the modem here. There's probably guys with just boxes of these blanking plates. This is the VIC2 4FXO. I don't know much of anything about these other than by reading the documentation. I'm fairly certain I can accomplish what I want to accomplish with them. The VIC3 4FX DID. I think this is probably the more useful card, and the one that probably doesn't work in that older router. There we go. All right, ready to fire this up and see if we can detect all that hardware. I don't know that I'm in love with the power and the console and storage and stuff being on the front and all the other connectivity on the back. I don't know, maybe it makes sense in certain rack configurations. Let's power it up. It's pretty loud at first. This thing is pretty cool. It's got variable speed fans. So when it gets to this point where it's loading up iOS, a relay clicks and it gets way quieter. But right as that relay clicks, it appears to hang at this part in the boot process, even though it's still loading. It'll come to life in a second. And so you think it's broken at first, but yeah, it quiets right down. It's a pretty nice machine. While it's loading, we've got Cisco iOS 12.3 build 8, I think. And it's this ADVIP Services K9 feature set. We'll see if that does us any favors. Okay, fully booted. So we go to privilege mode and we can do a show diag. And this is just the motherboard itself, but if we scroll down a little bit, WIC slot 0. This is our FXS card, and we get the dreaded unknown WAN daughter card. Usually this just means the version of iOS doesn't know what to do with this thing. So what I like to do is you actually just search this exact FRU product ID here, VIC3 4FX DID, and eventually you'll find the Cisco datasheet for the device with the supported platforms. And it claims it supports the 2800 series of routers. Sometimes the documents will tell you exactly what iOS version, but usually it's a safe bet that you just need a newer version, so that's okay. Scroll down a little more. Here it recognizes the FXO card just fine in WIC slot 1. Unfortunately, we're not going to be using this, as I illustrated earlier. And then we keep going, and WIC slot 3, unknown WAN daughter card. This is our 1-port modem. Same story, you search the exact product ID, and again, the WIC 1AM V2, which is what I've got in there, claims to support Cisco 2800. So we just have the wrong iOS version. This document on the modem tells you a little bit more. It says the feature was introduced in iOS 12.2.2, integrated in 12.2.2.8, and then integrated to support this specific WIC in 12.3.14. I don't understand what the difference between each of those modification levels is, but if we take a look at the latest one, 12.3.14, we can get in here and do a show version. We're running 12.3.8, so no matter what, we've got an older version of iOS than the modem claims it will support. What I'm going to do is go find a newer version of iOS. I have videos where I've covered this before, so I'm not going to go over it again in great detail. I'll link in the description below if you want to see exactly how you would do this with a TFTP server and stuff. So I'll be back when I find the right version. Okay, this is the first one I tried. It's this IP Voice K9 iOS version 12.4.4. And let's do a show diag. It still doesn't understand the FXS card, which is the one we need, unknown WAN daughter card. I think I saw when it's booting it like the modem though. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so getting closer. It now understands the single port modem WIC. I'm sort of suspicious that this thing doesn't actually support the VIC3 card, but we'll find out. Okay, little adventure later. This is looking promising. It noticed 4 FXS interfaces as it booted up. Get in here and do a show diag. It sees the FXS card. That's the one we want. Of course, it sees the FXO card, the one we're not going to use. It always saw that one. And our single port modem WIC. Party time. For those following along at home, you of course want the classic C28NM Adventerprise K9 IVSM version 12.415 XZ. Of course, so simple. Like I was saying before, my experience with this stuff is when in doubt, go for a newer iOS version. All I really had to go off of was this third-party datasheet for the card, and it claimed that Cisco 2801 with these certain, iOS bundles would work. 12.415XZ, which is exactly what we have installed, was the OS required, and turned out to be true. I am getting the sneaking suspicion that I am missing some additional hardware I need to use these cards. So a show inventory. It detects the voice cards happily. There's the FXO, FXS. But if I configure the terminal, I'm expecting to have a voice port command, and I don't, which is leading me to believe I might not be able to use these with this particular router. Well, as it turns out, these voice modules are not going to work in this 2821, despite my best efforts. It has 3 what are called PVDM slots inside. In fact, it's got 3 lights on the back to indicate whether or not they're active. PVDM stands for Packet Voice Digital Signal Processor Module. And basically it lets this router use voice cards. Let's crack this thing open and look at the slots. Just looks like the 3 screws right here. So I'll do that real quick. Quite the machine. Anyway, I think these are our 3 PVDM slots. I'm guessing those aren't too expensive on eBay. I don't know what I'm actually going to use this for. I mean, this was just my experiment to try to get everything in one box before I move everything over to the 3745 after I buy some more gear. So the moral here is the best way to learn is by doing. I could have read a million documents and I was never going to figure this out until I tried it, which is fine. Well, we're back where we started. I've got the voice cards in the 2911, the one they came in the first place. But we'll get 2 dial-up lines going one way or another by the end of this video. Ideally, this card here will be replacing this and in fact operating as 2 of them. And then I've got 2 modems in the 2600, and it's just a learning experience here, and I'll figure out what parts I need to buy for everything else. Also, this 2911 has the console on the back, everything on the back, except for power. What's up with that? Wait a second. This thing has 2 PVDMs installed. See the lights are on right there. I wonder if they're compatible with the other one. Let's crack this thing open and do some research. That 2800 was growing on me. This thing sounds like crap. Here they are. That's what a PVDM looks like. Anyway, these are way too new. They're like 5 years newer than the other router, so it uses different form factor. All right, that 2911 is coming to life, and I think it's going to work out for us because we can see we've got these interface FXS, foreign exchange station, messages coming up, which also means it has been totally configured already and probably hasn't been factory reset. Yeah, so this thing is called the C2911 Safety Zone, and I don't have the password. I realize it's hard to keep track here as I'm dealing with like 3 or 4 routers, throwing all these numbers around. This is the one with the black case that came with those voice cards in the first place. So I'm gonna go off and factory reset this thing. I never know how much detail to show when I'm doing this stuff because you can just kind of Google it, but let me know if you don't want to see these factory reset stuff in future videos. But basically, as it's starting up right away, at least when I'm using PuTTY, you can send a break by right-clicking the title bar, special command, and then break. It'll stop and it'll get into ROM-MON. And then I would recommend searching Cisco, the series, in my case, 2900 series, password reset, and you'll find what you need. In my case, I need to do this. This conf reg thing is going to tell it to ignore its existing configuration. Then I can issue a reload to restart it. And by that I mean reset. I'm going to noise cancel it. I won't subject you to it, but this thing has variable speed fans, and it's like really bad at using them. See, 2015, that's why I don't want to use this thing. It's too new. It's making me nervous. You know you're in a fresh state when it's asking you in the system configuration dialog if you'd like to run through the initial config. Always say no. Okay, now you can see its hostname is router, which is the Cisco default. If I go into privilege mode, I have full access again. That confrag thing we told ROM-MON said ignore the existing configuration. So now what we want to do is configure the terminal. We're going to issue a config register command that's going to say start listening again to the configuration. We're in a totally fresh configuration, so we're going to write it out to memory, and then we're going to reload. And now what's going to happen, this router is totally factory reset, and it's going to boot like this every time. And what I was looking for before, we have a voice port command, and it appears we can configure the ports on the cards. I'm going to do a little research and see if we can't get a dial tone, and I'm going to get this thing the hell out of here. I'm not sure it's going to come across on audio, but I'm going to turn off noise canceling. This thing sounds like it's got like 5 hard drives in it, and knives are being shoved into them. All right, we have dial tone. Let's do some infrastructure upgrades to run some analog lines to the other room. So those Cisco routers can get pretty loud, so I don't want to run it in here. When I had initially set up my original Homelab dial-up configuration, I had ran a physical telephone line from this room to a room that's about 20 feet that direction through 2 walls into an area that has a rack and all my other networking equipment, and I can't hear it in here. Well, with the upgrade I'm planning, I want at least 2 lines, and I don't want to run one of these every time. On the other side of this wall, I actually have a patch panel and a trunk of 15 or so Cat5e lines going to the network rack. Phone cable, while it does contain 4 connectors, only requires the middle 2, and Cat5e and Cat6 cable have 4 stranded pairs. If my math is correct, that means I can run 4 of these over 1 of my existing Ethernet lines. All you got to do is crimp an RJ11 right on there like that. In this case, I went white, green, then green. All I have to do is do green, white, green on this side. I hadn't done this previously because I simply didn't have these connectors that I needed. So let's see if I can do this. Green, white, green this time. I've got this pass-through crimper. Makes it pretty easy. So what's supposed to happen, this is the RJ45 side. You can see there's a knife that goes in there and cuts. I don't have one on this side, so yeah, you have to cut off the little bits yourself, I guess. But it's no big deal. You saw it took me all of a few seconds. So now we have a phone cord. Let's test it out. Beautiful. This is just my test run, by the way. I'm obviously not going to use this one. Works great. So I've got this patch panel in here that I'm pretty proud of because it's come in quite handy. These 4 just go back to the network rack. This one goes directly to the NIC on my Proxmox machine, which I can pass through to VMs, usually a Windows XP VM. Really, really handy. These guys are actually connected to this thing. I had dreams of this being like a retro video game repair shop, you know? So I'd be plugging the video game systems in here and having like a retro tank right here to convert to HDMI for a monitor. And in practice, I just don't do that stuff anymore. So I've got some RJ11 jacks on the way that I can replace these with. These are called keystones, by the way. This is a keystone patch panel. And these all just, you know, come out. And these are USBs. This one goes to my main machine. I usually use that for USB to the serial console for the Cisco machines. Here's some HDMI ports that I used to use for different monitors. The beauty of it is I can change my mind. I can pull all this out and it's not that big of a deal. So we're going to dedicate a couple phone lines right here. And the way I'm going to get 4 phone lines between here and the other room is with this. I've got a normal RJ45 connector on one end, and then I split it out into 4 phone lines. What this means is without running a new line, I can get that over to the other room. And then I have 4 phone lines going between the 2 rooms. I've got a matched set of these. So remember from before, it's important to just switch the wire direction. So here on this one, I've got white, green, and then green. And on the other one, it's going the opposite. Green, white, green. And then I guess just to really drive the point home here, I've got the orange line plugged in over here. I've got the orange line plugged in over here to the telephone. This coupler between the 2 RJ45s represents all the wiring between this room and another one. And if we pick up the phone, I bet you didn't expect to see this today. I am really enjoying this, like way too much. This is like primo Homelab stuff. It's my lucky day. As I'm filming this, some RJ11 keystones showed up in the mail. I removed those RCA keystones I was showing you earlier that I'm not using. And behind the scenes, my fancy little cable, I'm going to put those RJ11 keystones in. We'll just do blue and a green line for now, 2 lines. There they are. I've got the blue one and the one that was already labeled B. And of course, it's my fancy little cable here. And I think I'll be able to reuse this label cut the G off, put it over here. So there we go. I've got the blue line and the green line, analog phone lines. And I'll use a regular old RJ45 coupler to send this back over one of the lines to the rack. I've got those 4 phone lines rolling back over to the room with the rack, and I'm going to refer to them by color just to keep things straight. I've got the blue line going into port 0 of the FXS card, and the green line going into port 1. Back over in the workshop, we've got blue and green, blue and green. And the configuration I want, which I don't even know is possible yet, we're going to find out together. I want to be able to dial a number on this phone and make this phone ring. I don't know that I've explained this very well, but I want a modem on a computer to be able to dial up on the blue line. The Cisco router is going to act as an ATA, or analog telephone adapter, and immediately put it out on another line, which will actually just be hooked up to a modem. This will effectively let me replace my physical ATAs with just Cisco gear, and eventually, after whatever I need to learn tonight, I'll be able to buy all the right modules for that 3745, and I'll get it all in one box. Reading the documentation was worthwhile. Check this out. These are connected to 2 different ports on the Cisco FXS. If I dial 4 zeros on this one, it's going to call this. And if I dial 4 ones on this one, I think this is going to work. I think I can replace this with FXS cards. Okay, I honestly didn't expect to have that much success so fast. So I've got the Windows XP machine out. It's hooked up to a real modem, and the modem is hooked up to our blue line. Now that we know that the blue line can call the green line, I've got the blue line flowing into a modem on the 2600. I wanted to do this all in one box, of course, but we're gonna have to do that later. The point is, the blue line can call this one, which will in turn call the modem. So the box down here is simulating a telephone network for us. The only changes I made on the FXX port, I can dial in with this 425-271-5555. These first 6 digits are my childhood phone number, which is a real analog line. When you're your own telecom, you can do whatever you want. Oh man. I think it's gonna work. It's definitely gonna work. Oh man. Connected at 1.2 kilobits per second. Yes, it's working. That's of course all this old thing can do. Okay, that's one dial-up line working. Let's plug our green line into the next port on the card, and then another wire in the last port. That'll of course go up to our second modem, and I'll show you how I got all this configured. Back on the router, we now have a voice port command, and you reference these cards in a Cisco router by slot number, and it's a hierarchy. A very useful tool to figure out which card you're trying to target is you do a show inventory, and we see the FXS card we care about is in slot 0, subslot 1. So the whole unit is slot 0. Our card happens to be in subslot 1, and it of course has 4 ports. So if I need to configure the voice port that we just plugged our green wire into, I'm going to say voice port slot 0, subslot 1, port 2. And in here, all I'm going to do is give it a description of green so I don't go nuts. That's all you have to do with the voice port. And to deal with what happens when numbers are being dialed into the system, you configure something called a dial peer. So I'm going to say dial peer. It is a voice type. You give it an arbitrary tag number. They just have to be unique. My existing one is 10, so I'm going to use 20. And then its type is POTS, plain old telephone service. Another type is like VoIP if you were configuring that, but I'm just dealing with analog lines. Now we're configuring the dial peer. We're going to want a destination pattern, and we'll give it a slightly different number than the other one. So that's saying anything dealing with this number, this dial peer is assigned to it. And then we have an incoming called number, same deal. We'll say calls coming into this number, this dial peer is dealing with, and then we issue a direct inward dial and tell it which port to pass this along to. In our case, it's going to be 0, 1, and then the final port on the card. If you take a look at my running config, I've defined port 0 on the card, description blue, and then the third one over description is green, not much to the voice port configuration. And then you can see we've got 2 dial peers. The first one handling this number directs it to the first modem, and the second one on the green line handling this number directs it to the second modem. Now, the moment we've been waiting for. We're going to try to dial up on both of these computers at the same time, each leveraging one of our new analog lines. Speaking of those lines going into these modems, if you're curious about how to set these modems up on Cisco gear, in my previous video on Homelab dial-up, I go over all of that. I'll link to that video in the description down below. We've got the ThinkPad laptop hooked up to our original blue line that we know works. We're going to dial this one up with our original 5555 number. It has connected successfully. We'll get the Windows XP machine plugged into the new line we just configured. It's going to use our new 7777 number. I think it's going to work. And it did. This one's connected too. Both of these are online, each leveraging a separate analog line and a separate modem on the 2600. This is super exciting. But I've got one more test I want to do. This is my Dreamcast. It's got the modem adapter on the side there. It should be able to dial up. I picked this thing up in like 2008 or something at a thrift store. 13 bucks with a controller, all the cables. Used to be a lot more fun to collect video games back then. She's seen a couple upgrades over the years. We got the GD EMU in there, so I can play my legally ripped games off SD card for maximum convenience. She's got the Noxua mod, barely makes any sound. It's actually pretty straightforward to get these things online these days. You get a Raspberry Pi, and there's a project called DreamPi. You get that software on there. Then you get a USB modem adapter. Then you get a line voltage inducer. Keep the modems happy. And you can be online, but I mean, so clunky. Who needs all this? Clearly, my setup is way more straightforward. That's sarcasm, by the way. Let's get this thing hooked up. And if we're going to surf the web, you know, we might as well be comfortable. I don't have the mouse, unfortunately. Just the keyboard. Check out my new computer. I've also got this nice pound HDMI cable for it. So hopefully it won't look like total crap for you all. GD EMU is loading. All right, let's go down to Sega Dreamcast browser. Anyone remember this? I used this a few times. My buddy had a Dreamcast in like, I don't know, what's it been, 2001. No memory blocks. Okay, that's fine. Start to begin. Connect. Dialing. I didn't tell it what number to dial. What do you do here? Start, maybe? Okay. There must be somewhere you can change this. Yeah. Okay. Internet connection. Colby. My name's Colby. Where did it persist that? These are my DreamPi settings for dialing into the Raspberry Pi I just showed you. I can't remember where it saves that. I don't have a VMU in. Good thing we've got this keyboard and it works. That's good. All right. I think my password is test. Numpad works. We'll try the 555. This is fun. I haven't done this in a while. Okay. That all seems fine. Just kidding. It froze. Maybe it needs a VMU. I honestly can't remember. Yeah, this isn't good. Very bad. I don't have a disk. Restarted. Maybe the GD EMU doesn't like the web browser. I could also pop a VMU in. Yeah, it did not save my settings. Let's just try it again, I guess. I'm gonna cancel this screen. It crashed when I said okay. Can I save it? Does the modem have internal memory? I'll have to look that up later. That's wild. I suppose it makes sense. Okay, let's see. Let's see if this works. This is a really good sign. I'm very nervous. I'm really glad that it has that spinning animation, so I can tell if something's going on. Modem connecting. Oh man. No. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's. Let's turn on verbose modem messages. Double check all this. All right, do some Googling. Check out this screensaver on this thing. Dang. Here it is streaming the very verbose modem messages. I also turned on debug logging on the 2600, the one with the modems in it, and it spits out a bunch of information. It knows the Dreamcast is trying to connect with the CLAB user. Maybe the Dreamcast doesn't like the IP it's being given. This screensaver surprises me every time. It's complaining about a host, so let's give it DNS, I guess. So with DNS, I get unable to load the requested document. I wonder if it is connecting and is immediately trying to talk to some server and that's just not working. I am almost certain that's what's happening because the Dreamcast is connected to the router. So it dialed up successfully. This async 2 connection is the Dreamcast. It's been connected for 4 minutes. It does dial up and then the browser is trying to talk to servers or websites that aren't available anymore or something. Well, I was hoping I could, hit Google or something, or actually see the web browser. But we are technically online with the Dreamcast. It's just too old and stupid to do anything with the connection. I guess just to prove it to ourselves, let's see if we can connect to a Phantasy Star Online server. You can dedicate entire games to a single SD card if you're really feeling it. The VMU is in. Okay, I'm like hoping I can just continue and it remembers the server. Online. Saying we might be charged by our telephone provider. I would like to connect. The modem obviously persisted the settings we were messing around with. Let's see if this works. I can't remember where you point it at, like third-party PSO servers. It's been a few years since I messed around with this stuff. I mean, here we go. We're online with the Dreamcast, playing Phantasy Star Online. So it works. It works. Well, I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with this progress. So I didn't even realize when I started this whole adventure that I was finally going to be able to take advantage of the approximately 300 Dreamcasts I own for some reason. And the ultimate goal here is to get my entire ISP setup with 8 lines to dial in on. Inside this 3745, I want to be able to flip a switch and everything's good to go. I went a little buck wild on eBay this week, so we're going to max this guy out and take advantage of the modularity. Now what I'm doing with that FXS card is a little abnormal. You wouldn't really use it as an ATA, though I must say I'm happy to be done with these. You would usually be having that FXS card connect to like a VoIP system or a PBX and a little more complicated than I want to deal with, but maybe we'll bite that off in the future. I hope you enjoyed following along as I stumbled my way through voice cards. I know a lot more about them now, and I'm feeling pretty confident that I can get this thing into the shape I'd like it in. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I've got lots more content like this on the way. I'm a Dreamcast streamer now. And if you'd really like to support the channel, I'm on Patreon. I post behind the scenes type videos, sneak peeks at what I'm looking at, and the occasional early video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.